Hi guys, tonight, we travel back into the world's most forgotten history. Close your eyes, relax, and drift into history. Welcome to another quiet journey through the past. Tonight's story begins in a distant, forgotten age. Settle in, and let history slowly fade you into sleep. This is boring history for sleep. Relax, and step gently into the ancient world. Tonight, history becomes calm, quiet, and sleepy. Let the past carry you softly into sleep. In tonight's slow and peaceful history story, we leave behind great monuments and famous rulers for a little while. Instead, we follow the ordinary people whose names were never carved into stone. Their lives passed quietly beside the Nile River. Their days followed the same gentle rhythm, again and again, like the steady flow of the water that carried life through Egypt. Long before sunrise, while the stars still shimmered above the dark desert, the land rested beneath a blanket of silence. The great river moved almost without a sound. Tiny waves touched muddy banks lined with reeds that bent softly in the cool night breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a water bird called once before falling quiet again. The villages were asleep. Mud brick homes stood close together, their flat roofs catching the pale light of the fading moon. Their walls held the warmth of yesterday's sun, though the air had become pleasantly cool during the night. Small courtyards waited peacefully for another day of cooking, grinding grain, mending baskets, and sharing simple meals. Inside one small house, a family slept together on woven reed mats. Linen blankets rested lightly over tired bodies. A clay oil lamp had burned low hours ago, leaving only a faint smell of warm smoke mixed with dry earth. The father slept deeply after another long day working beside the river fields. His hands were rough. His shoulders carried the memory of many seasons lifting heavy baskets, digging irrigation channels, and carrying bundles of harvested grain beneath the relentless Egyptian sun. Beside him, his wife rested quietly. Her own day had been no less demanding. She had spent long hours grinding wheat into flour with heavy stone tools. She had carried water from the river. She had baked bread, woven cloth, prepared vegetables, cared for children, swept dusty floors, and repaired worn clothing. Even sleep felt like another important task. Near their feet, two children dreamed peacefully. Tomorrow they would begin learning the routines that had shaped their parents' lives. Childhood in ancient Egypt was filled with moments of laughter, but it was also a slow education in responsibility. Every season taught another lesson. Every family member had work to do. Outside, the village remained still. The streets were narrow paths of packed earth. Sand had drifted gently against walls overnight. A few sleeping dogs curled beside doorways. Donkeys stood quietly beneath simple shelters, occasionally shifting their weight with a soft shuffle of hooves. Nothing hurried. Nothing demanded attention. The world seemed content simply to exist for another peaceful hour before dawn. Far beyond the village, the desert stretched endlessly beneath countless stars. Its silence was deep and comforting. The sand dunes waited patiently for the first golden light that would slowly awaken the landscape. The people of Egypt understood this rhythm better than anyone. Day followed night. The river rose and fell. Fields became green before turning golden again. Children became parents. Parents grew old. Life rarely rushed forward. Instead, it moved like the Nile itself, steady and dependable. As the eastern horizon slowly brightened, the village began to wake almost without anyone noticing exactly when it happened. One rooster called. Another answered from somewhere farther away. A woman quietly rose from her sleeping mat, careful not to wake everyone else. Her bare feet touched the cool earthen floor. She reached for a small clay lamp, adding fresh oil before lighting the wick. A gentle glow spread across the room, revealing baskets stacked neatly against one wall and pottery jars filled with grain. The smell of yesterday's bread still lingered in the warm air. She stepped outside into the courtyard. Above her, the stars slowly disappeared one by one. The first breeze of morning carried the scent of damp river water mixed with dry reeds and distant fields. It would be the coolest part of the entire day. Everyone knew they should make good use of these precious hours before the heat settled across the land. Nearby, another household was already awake. An elderly man sat quietly outside his home. He watched the changing sky without speaking. His knees no longer allowed him to work in the fields every day, but years of habit still woke him before sunrise. He listened to familiar sounds that had greeted him every morning since childhood. The splash of water. The call of birds. The soft voices of neighbors greeting one another. The slow beginning of another ordinary day. Nothing about this morning was unusual. That was exactly what made it comforting. For many generations, mornings had unfolded almost exactly like this. Children rubbed sleep from their eyes. Women prepared grain. Men gathered simple tools. The village slowly came alive without noise or hurry. Soon the steady sound of grinding stones echoed softly through several homes. Making flour required patience. A woman knelt beside a heavy grinding stone, moving another smooth stone back and forth across dried wheat kernels. The work demanded strength in the shoulders and arms. Hour after hour, the same movement repeated until fine flour slowly collected beneath her hands. Tiny particles floated into the morning air. The smell of fresh grain mixed with cool desert air. Nearby, another woman carefully shaped small rounds of dough before placing them inside a simple clay oven already warming with glowing coals. Soon the smell of baking bread drifted through the village. Warm. Earthy. Comforting. Children noticed immediately. One little boy wandered sleepily toward the oven, hoping for the first fresh loaf of the day. His mother smiled gently. She handed him a small piece while reminding him not to burn his fingers. He nodded carefully before sitting on a low mud brick wall, watching the sunrise with warm bread resting in both hands. The first rays of sunlight touched the tops of nearby palm trees. Golden light spread slowly across the fields. The Nile reflected the new day like polished bronze. Boats tied along the riverbank rocked gently against wooden posts. Fishermen were already preparing their nets. Fishing required careful timing. The river provided food, but only to those willing to rise before much of the world had awakened. One fisherman checked each knot in his woven net. Another inspected his small wooden boat for cracks. Neither spoke very much. There was comfort in quiet company. They understood each other's routine without needing many words. Soon they pushed away from the muddy shore. Wood creaked softly. Water rippled around the narrow boat. The village became smaller behind them as they drifted into gentle morning mist rising from the cool river. Along the riverbank, farmers gathered simple wooden tools. The fertile black soil left behind after each flood was precious beyond measure. Without it, Egypt would have been only desert. Every harvest depended upon careful attention. Every field represented months of steady effort. One farmer bent to examine young plants growing in neat rows. Another carried water using balanced yokes across his shoulders. Others repaired small canals that carried river water toward thirsty crops. None of these tasks seemed remarkable. Yet together they sustained an entire civilization. The work continued quietly. Step after step. Season after season. Children sometimes accompanied their parents into the fields. They learned by watching. They carried lighter baskets. They frightened birds away from young crops. They fetched water when asked. Learning happened naturally through daily life rather than long explanations. An older daughter carefully copied her mother's movements while tying bundles of harvested reeds. She did not need many instructions. Her hands remembered what her eyes had observed for years. The sun climbed higher. The pleasant coolness slowly disappeared. Warmth settled across the fields. Workers wiped sweat from their foreheads. Still, nobody expected comfort. The heat belonged to Egypt just as surely as the river did. People adjusted their pace. They paused briefly beneath scattered trees whenever shade appeared. They drank carefully from pottery jars wrapped in damp cloth to keep the water cooler. Even these short moments of rest felt meaningful. Nearby, a team of builders carried limestone blocks intended for repairs to a storage building. Not every laborer worked on famous temples or royal monuments. Many spent their lives repairing walls, raising houses, strengthening canals, and maintaining granaries. These ordinary projects rarely appeared in stories. Yet they shaped everyday life far more than palaces ever could. The builders moved together with practiced rhythm. Lift. Step. Breathe. Lower. Pause. Again. Nobody rushed. Working too quickly beneath the Egyptian sun only invited exhaustion. Slow consistency mattered far more than bursts of speed. Dust rose around their sandals with every careful step. The smell of limestone filled the warm air. Simple songs sometimes drifted quietly among workers, not loud celebrations, but gentle rhythms helping everyone maintain steady movement together. By late morning, workshops throughout nearby towns had become busy. Potters shaped wet clay upon spinning wheels. Carpenters smoothed rough wood with copper tools. Basket makers patiently wove reeds gathered from the riverbanks. Leather workers repaired worn sandals. Stone carvers carefully chipped decorative patterns into household objects. Inside each workshop, sunlight entered through open doorways, creating bright rectangles across dusty floors. The sounds blended together softly. Wood tapping. Stone scraping. Clay turning. Quiet conversation. None of it felt hurried. Each craft demanded patience more than speed. A young apprentice carefully watched an experienced potter shape another water jar. His first attempts had collapsed many times before. Today his hands were steadier. He centered the clay more carefully. His teacher said very little. Sometimes learning happened best in silence. Across town, a scribe unrolled fresh papyrus. Writing required years of practice. Few people could read or write, making scribes respected members of society. Yet even their days were filled mostly with routine rather than excitement. Lists of grain. Records of supplies. Notes about workers. Household accounts. Careful numbers. Patient handwriting. The scribe dipped his reed pen into black ink. Each character appeared slowly. Neatly. Deliberately. Outside his doorway, life continued almost unnoticed. Children chased one another briefly before returning to small chores. Goats wandered lazily through shaded alleys. Women balanced baskets upon their heads with graceful confidence learned through years of practice. The sun continued its steady climb toward midday. Its light became brilliant. Its warmth became heavy. Air shimmered above stone walls. The village slowed naturally. People sought shade wherever they could find it. Large sycamore trees became welcome gathering places. Neighbors rested together for a little while. Some shared bread. Others peeled onions or figs. Clay cups passed quietly from hand to hand. Conversations remained gentle. People spoke about crops, family members, repairs that needed doing, or hopes that next season's flood would be generous. No one expected life to become easy. Instead, they hoped for enough. Enough grain. Enough water. Enough health. Enough peace. Those quiet hopes carried families through countless generations. As afternoon approached, the distant sound of children laughing floated across the warm air before fading again into the steady rhythm of another ordinary Egyptian day. The laughter drifted away as softly as it had arrived, carried across the warm afternoon by a gentle breeze from the Nile. Soon only the familiar sounds of work remained. A wooden shovel scraped against dry earth. A donkey let out a slow, tired call. Somewhere beyond the fields, reeds whispered together where the river quietly slipped past the shore. The day had settled into its hottest hours. The bright sky held almost no clouds. The sun stood high above the valley, pouring its light over every rooftop, every field, every narrow path between mud brick homes. Heat shimmered above the ground until the distant palm trees seemed to move like reflections upon water. No one expected the afternoon to be easy. The people of Egypt had learned to live beside the heat rather than struggle against it. They understood its moods as naturally as they understood the changing seasons of the Nile. The warmth shaped the pace of every task. It decided when to work harder, when to slow down, and when to rest for a little while beneath whatever shade could be found. In one small field beside an irrigation canal, an older farmer paused with both hands resting upon the smooth handle of his wooden hoe. He looked across rows of green barley moving gently in the breeze. The plants were not yet ready for harvest. They still had many weeks of growing ahead. But each day required careful attention. Water had to reach every corner of the field. Weeds needed to be removed before they spread too far. Small problems, if ignored, could quietly grow into larger ones. He bent once more to his work. His movements were slow, almost thoughtful. The earth was soft beneath his sandals where water had recently flowed through the narrow channels. Tiny frogs hid among the reeds. Dragonflies floated above the water, their wings flashing silver whenever they caught the sunlight. Nearby, his youngest daughter carried a small clay jar filled with drinking water. The jar was heavy for her small arms, yet she carried it with quiet determination. She had watched her older brothers perform this same task for years. Now it was her turn to help. When she reached her father, she smiled without saying much. He accepted the jar with grateful hands. The cool water tasted of clay and the river itself. It was simple. It was refreshing. For a few quiet moments, father and daughter stood together beneath the shade of a single date palm. Neither felt the need to fill the silence with words. The wind spoke gently through the leaves above them. Farther along the riverbank, fishermen checked their woven traps. The morning had been kind. Several fish shimmered inside baskets lined with damp reeds. They would become part of the evening meal for many families before the day was over. One fisherman carefully untangled a net that had caught on submerged branches. His hands moved patiently through each knot. There was no frustration. The river always asked for patience. It had done so long before he was born, and it would continue asking long after his own grandchildren had grown old. The Nile never hurried. Its calm nature quietly taught the same lesson to everyone who depended upon it. Small boats drifted lazily near the shore. Some carried vegetables toward nearby villages. Others transported jars of oil, woven baskets, bundles of papyrus, or sacks filled with grain. The boatmen worked with steady confidence. Long wooden poles pressed gently against the riverbed in shallow places. Simple linen sails caught the breeze whenever the wind became favorable. The river itself seemed almost alive. It carried food. It carried people. It carried stories from village to village. It carried the hopes of an entire civilization. Along one quiet stretch of shoreline, women knelt beside smooth stones washing linen clothing. They dipped each piece into the cool water before rubbing it carefully with fine sand and smooth river pebbles. The work demanded time more than strength. Children played nearby under watchful eyes. A little boy crouched beside the water watching tiny fish dart between waving reeds. His fingers reached toward the surface, but the fish were always quicker. Each time they disappeared into darker water, he smiled quietly before trying again. His mother glanced toward him from time to time. She never called loudly. She knew he would stay close enough. Around them, conversations rose and fell like the gentle current itself. Neighbors exchanged small pieces of news. Someone's daughter had become engaged. A new baby had arrived safely a few villages away. An elderly woman was recovering from a recent illness. Another family's roof needed repairing before the next flood season. Life was made of these simple conversations. No grand speeches. No urgent announcements. Only ordinary moments shared between people who had known one another for many years. Back within the village, the smell of bread returned once more. Another batch had just been lifted from the clay oven. The crusts were golden brown, lightly dusted with flour. Warm air carried their comforting aroma through nearby streets. A grandmother carefully stacked fresh loaves inside a woven basket lined with clean linen. Her hands had baked bread almost every day of her life. She could judge the heat of the oven by experience alone. She knew exactly when to add more fuel. Exactly when to wait. Exactly when each loaf was ready. These skills had never been written upon papyrus. They had passed quietly from one generation to the next through observation, patience, and practice. Inside nearby homes, meals slowly came together. Clay pots simmered above small cooking fires. Lentils softened into thick stews. Onions, garlic, herbs, and beans added gentle flavors. Fresh fish waited to be roasted. Dates and figs rested inside shallow bowls. Simple meals filled tired bodies with enough strength for another day's work. No one expected endless variety. The familiar foods brought comfort. Each meal reminded families that another day had been completed. Another sunrise had been met with honest labor. Another evening would soon bring welcome rest. In a shaded workshop near the edge of town, a carpenter continued shaping wooden boards into a storage chest. Fine curls of cedar rested upon the floor around his feet. His copper chisel caught small flashes of sunlight whenever it struck the wood. The scent of fresh timber mixed with warm dust. His young apprentice swept the floor with a bundle of reeds. Every few moments he paused to study the carpenter's hands. Years from now, those same careful movements would become his own. Learning happened one quiet afternoon at a time. No lesson was rushed. No skill appeared overnight. Patience built both furniture and craftsmen. Not far away, a stone mason polished the surface of a limestone block. This stone would never become part of a great temple. Instead, it would strengthen the entrance to a family home. Even ordinary buildings deserved careful work. The mason understood that families would walk through this doorway every day for many years. Children would grow taller beside these walls. Parents would grow older. Grandparents might one day sit nearby enjoying the evening breeze. A well-made stone offered quiet service without asking for recognition. As the afternoon slowly stretched onward, shadows began to lengthen. The fierce brightness softened little by little. Birds returned to the trees after sheltering from the hottest hours. The village breathed more easily. Workers who had paused beneath shade gradually returned to their tasks. The cooler air brought fresh energy. A group of laborers repaired a section of irrigation canal where part of the bank had slowly crumbled. Each basket of damp earth was passed carefully from one pair of hands to another. The work depended upon cooperation. No single person could rebuild the canal alone. One man dug fresh soil. Another packed it firmly into place. A third smoothed the sides with a wooden tool. Children carried small baskets of reeds used to strengthen the edges. Even the smallest hands found ways to help. The canal would carry precious water tomorrow just as it had yesterday. Its quiet purpose was understood by everyone. Without these careful channels, the fertile land would slowly dry beneath the sun. Nearby, an elderly woman gathered herbs growing beside her home. Some leaves added flavor to food. Others were valued for their gentle healing qualities. Ancient Egyptians understood many plants through careful observation passed across generations. When someone developed a cough, certain herbs were prepared as warm drinks. When sore muscles troubled tired workers after long days in the fields, fragrant oils were gently rubbed into aching shoulders. Not every illness could be cured. Life remained uncertain in many ways. Yet families cared for one another with remarkable patience. Comfort often mattered just as much as healing. As the afternoon light became golden, goats wandered home through dusty paths. Their bells rang softly with each slow step. Donkeys carried empty baskets now much lighter than they had been in the morning. Children ran ahead to open simple wooden gates. The village gradually shifted from labor toward evening. Women swept courtyards one final time. Dust rose briefly before settling again. Fresh water was poured into storage jars. Cooking fires burned a little brighter. The smell of smoke drifted gently upward into the calm sky. A few older men gathered beneath a large sycamore tree near the center of the village. They sat upon low stools polished smooth through many years of use. Their conversations unfolded slowly. One remembered an especially generous flood from decades earlier. Another spoke of repairing fishing boats with his father when he had been only a boy. Memories arrived gently. No one interrupted. Long pauses were welcome. The fading light seemed to encourage quiet reflection. Children played nearby until their mothers called them home. Games ended without complaint. Little feet hurried across warm earth. Soon families gathered inside small courtyards where evening meals waited. Bread was broken and shared. Bowls passed from one person to another. Simple thanks were offered for another peaceful day. The heat slowly loosened its grip upon the valley. A cooler breeze arrived from the river. Palm leaves rustled overhead. Smoke from cooking fires drifted lazily into the deepening blue of the evening sky. One by one, the first stars quietly began to appear. And as daylight slowly slipped away from the fields, the ancient rhythm of Egypt gently prepared itself for another calm and unhurried night. The evening settled over the Nile with the same quiet certainty that it had for countless generations. The bright gold of the afternoon softened into shades of amber, then rose, and finally deep blue. The warmth of the day slowly slipped away from the mud brick walls, leaving behind air that felt easier to breathe. Across the fields, the last workers gathered their simple tools. Wooden hoes rested across tired shoulders. Bundles of reeds were tied neatly with strips of woven fiber. Clay water jars, now much lighter than they had been in the morning, were carried home one careful step at a time. No one hurried to leave. The work had found its natural stopping place. Tomorrow would bring another sunrise, another walk to the fields, another long day beneath the Egyptian sky. There was comfort in knowing that not every decision needed to be made again. The rhythm of life had already been quietly written by the seasons, the river, and the rising and setting of the sun. Along the narrow paths between the farms, neighbors walked together. Some spoke softly. Others simply enjoyed each other's company without feeling the need to fill every quiet moment with conversation. The dust beneath their sandals had become cooler. Each step left gentle footprints that the evening breeze would slowly soften before morning. A young boy carried a small woven basket filled with onions harvested that afternoon. The basket was not heavy, but after a long day it felt heavier than it had when the sun first rose. His father noticed. Without saying much, he reached over and lifted the basket onto his own shoulder. The boy smiled. Neither of them needed words. Small acts of kindness passed through ancient families as naturally as the river flowed through the valley. As they reached the village, familiar scents welcomed them home. Fresh bread still carried warmth from the oven. Roasted fish rested beside bowls of lentils. The sweet fragrance of dates drifted from woven trays waiting inside shaded courtyards. Cooking fires glowed softly beneath clay pots. Thin ribbons of smoke curled upward into the peaceful evening sky. Women finished preparing the final dishes while children carefully arranged simple pottery bowls upon low tables. Meals were not hurried events. They marked the gentle ending of another day. Families gathered close together. The youngest children often sat beside grandparents, listening quietly as familiar stories drifted through the warm evening air. Many of these stories had no famous heroes. They spoke of good harvests, of careful fishermen, of faithful donkeys that always found the road home, of clever craftsmen who repaired broken tools instead of throwing them away. These ordinary stories reminded children that everyday life held its own quiet importance. An elderly grandmother broke a fresh loaf into several pieces. She handed each family member a portion before serving herself last. Her hands moved slowly. The wrinkles across her fingers told their own story. For many decades those same hands had kneaded dough before sunrise, woven linen during long afternoons, soothed crying children, and comforted family members through sickness and old age. The work of her life could not be measured by monuments. It lived inside the people gathered around her. Nearby, a baby had finally fallen asleep after a restless afternoon. His mother gently rocked him against her shoulder. The steady rhythm of her breathing gradually became his own. Outside, evening insects sang softly among the reeds. The sound blended with distant frogs along the riverbank. Together they formed a quiet music that belonged only to the Nile after sunset. Across the village, lamps were beginning to glow. Each flame was small. Each one illuminated only a little corner of a room. Yet together they gave the settlement a peaceful warmth. Golden light spilled gently through open doorways. Shadows stretched across packed earth floors. Clay jars reflected tiny flickers of dancing firelight. The smell of warm oil mixed with baked earth. Inside one home, a father carefully repaired a fishing net before sleeping. His fingers worked by lamplight. Each broken strand was patiently tied back together. He knew that rushing would only leave weak knots. Strong nets were built one careful thread at a time. Tomorrow morning, before dawn, he would return to the river. Tonight's quiet repair would make tomorrow's work just a little easier. Not far away, a young scribe sat cross-legged beside a low wooden table. A reed pen rested between his fingers. His work for the day was nearly finished. He reviewed simple records of grain deliveries and storage jars. The neat lines of ink reflected years of careful training. Even after the official work ended, he sometimes practiced writing familiar symbols again and again. Not because anyone demanded it, but because steady practice brought confidence. The scratch of the pen against papyrus was almost soothing. Each line appeared slowly beneath his hand. Outside his window, the sounds of the village faded little by little. A donkey shifted quietly in its shelter. A child laughed once before being gently reminded that younger brothers were already asleep. Then silence returned. Farther along the river, several fishermen had chosen to remain beside their boats for the night. The stars reflected upon the calm water like scattered grains of silver. One fisherman leaned against the side of his small wooden boat. He looked toward the distant shoreline where only a few tiny lamps remained visible. The Nile at night felt different from the Nile during the day. The river seemed even slower, even deeper. The cool air carried away the heat that had pressed upon the valley for so many hours. A gentle breeze brushed across the water, lifting small ripples that caught the moonlight before disappearing again. The fisherman listened. He heard reeds brushing together. He heard insects hidden among the grasses. He heard the quiet splash of a fish somewhere beyond the darkness. There was nothing else. No loud voices. No crowded roads. Only the peaceful sounds of a living river that had flowed through Egypt for thousands of years. Back in the village, many families climbed onto the flat roofs of their homes. During warm seasons, these rooftops became comfortable places to spend the evening. The air was cooler there. The stars appeared brighter. Neighbors could greet one another from roof to roof without raising their voices. Children pointed toward familiar groups of stars. Older family members smiled as they listened. Many of those same stars had guided travelers across the desert long before their grandparents had been born. Night after night they crossed the sky without changing their path. There was reassurance in their quiet faithfulness. A young mother brushed dust from a woven sleeping mat. She spread a linen blanket across it before lifting her sleeping daughter into her arms. The little girl's hair smelled faintly of sunshine and river water. Her tiny sandals rested beside the mat. Tomorrow morning she would wear them again. Tomorrow she would follow her mother through another ordinary day. She would carry small baskets. She would watch bread being baked. She would learn which herbs grew beside the house. Without realizing it, she was slowly becoming part of the same peaceful rhythm that had shaped generations before her. Across another courtyard, an elderly man gently massaged oil into his tired knees. Years of walking behind plows had left their mark. His joints no longer moved as easily. Each evening brought its own small aches. Yet he accepted them without bitterness. They reminded him of a lifetime spent working beneath open skies. He remembered carrying his first harvest beside his father. He remembered teaching his own sons to guide irrigation water through the fields. Now younger hands completed many of those tasks. He watched with quiet satisfaction rather than sadness. Life continued. It always had. Nearby, two sisters folded clean linen that had dried beneath the afternoon sun. The cloth carried the fresh scent of warm air and river breeze. Each piece was smoothed carefully before being stacked inside a reed basket. Nothing was wasted. Every garment represented many hours of spinning, weaving, washing, and mending. Good linen was treated with quiet respect. The moon climbed higher. Its pale light covered the rooftops, the narrow streets, and the distant fields with a soft silver glow. Palm trees cast long shadows across the ground. The canals reflected narrow ribbons of moonlight that gently trembled whenever a breeze passed over the water. Most of the village had fallen asleep. Only a few quiet figures remained awake. A baker prepared tomorrow's grain. A guard watched over stored supplies. A mother comforted a restless child. A shepherd checked once more that every goat rested safely inside its enclosure. These final tasks belonged to the night, just as the morning belonged to fishermen and farmers. Time itself seemed to move more slowly beneath the stars. The desert beyond the fertile valley had become almost invisible. Only its cool silence remained. It surrounded Egypt like a vast and patient sea of sand, protecting the narrow ribbon of green life that followed the Nile. The people who slept within the village did not think of themselves as living through history. To them, this was simply another day. Another loaf of bread shared. Another field watered. Another roof repaired. Another family gathered together beneath the evening sky. The greatness of ancient Egypt was built not only by stone, but by these countless quiet days that asked ordinary people to wake before dawn, work with steady hands, care for one another, and find peace when night finally returned. And while the moon continued its slow journey across the heavens, the gentle breathing of sleeping families blended with the whisper of the river. As Egypt rested once more in the calm embrace of another ancient night, the night grew deeper, though it never felt empty. Silence in ancient Egypt was not the absence of sound. It was a gentle collection of quiet things living together. The steady flow of the Nile. The soft rustle of reeds moving in the cool breeze. The occasional cry of a night bird crossing the dark sky. The slow breathing of families asleep beneath linen blankets. The village rested with remarkable peace. Mud brick walls, warmed by the day's sun, slowly released their heat into the cool air. The rooftops where many families slept became comfortable places beneath the wide blanket of stars. Above them stretched a sky so clear that every constellation seemed close enough to touch. An elderly shepherd opened his eyes for a moment. Years of caring for animals had trained him to wake lightly during the night. He listened without lifting his head. Everything sounded as it should. The sheep shifted softly inside their enclosure. A goat stamped one hoof before settling again. The breeze carried no unusual smell, no unfamiliar footsteps, no signs of trouble. Satisfied, he closed his eyes once more. His sleep returned almost as gently as the wind itself. Far beyond the village, the river continued its endless journey toward the northern sea. It did not pause while people slept. It did not become impatient during the daylight hours. Whether the land was bright with morning or wrapped in darkness, the Nile kept moving with quiet determination. For thousands of years, people had measured their lives beside its patient current. Children learned to swim in its calm waters. Fishermen trusted it to feed their families. Farmers depended upon it to nourish their fields. Merchants followed it from town to town. Even those who lived many miles away thought about the river every day, because every loaf of bread, every basket of vegetables, every jar of water was connected to its gentle flow. As the deepest hours of the night slowly passed, the air became even cooler. A thin mist formed above parts of the river where the warm water met the cool night breeze. The reeds along the banks glistened with tiny drops of moisture. Small insects rested upon their narrow leaves. Everything seemed wrapped in quiet stillness. Inside one modest home, a grandmother stirred before dawn. She did not rise immediately. Instead, she listened. She had listened to these same sounds for more than 60 years. The distant river. The whisper of wind slipping through the doorway. The slow breathing of grandchildren sleeping nearby. These familiar sounds gave her comfort. Every morning began this way. There was no clock to announce the hour. The land itself quietly revealed the passing of time. She slowly sat up. Her knees reminded her that another year had passed. She smiled gently to herself. Age had brought slower movements, but it had also brought patience. She no longer rushed to complete every task. She understood that careful work often lasted longer than hurried work. Her feet touched the cool earthen floor. She reached for the small clay lamp beside her sleeping mat. Soon a tiny flame flickered to life, pushing back the darkness just enough to begin another day. The first task was always simple. She checked the bread stored from yesterday. Enough remained for breakfast. That meant less grain would need to be ground before sunrise. She quietly thanked the careful hands that had baked it. Outside, the eastern horizon remained dark, though one small ribbon of pale gray had begun to appear far beyond the desert. Morning was still some time away. The village remained mostly asleep. Only a handful of people were awake now. A baker stepped outside to gather dried reeds and small pieces of wood for the oven. He stacked them carefully beneath the clay chamber before striking a small spark. Soon a gentle fire began to glow. The smell of dry wood smoke drifted upward into the fading night. It was one of the first signs that another day had quietly begun. Not far away, another family prepared to grind fresh grain. A young woman poured wheat into the hollow of a large grinding stone. Beside her sat her oldest daughter. The little girl had only recently become strong enough to help. She watched her mother's steady rhythm. Forward. Back. Forward. Back. The heavy stone moved patiently across the grain. Tiny pieces slowly became fine flour. The work was not exciting. It was not easy. But it was deeply familiar. The mother did not speak very much. Instead, she allowed the sound of the grinding stone to become the lesson. The child copied the movement. At first her hand slipped. The stone felt heavier than she expected. Her mother smiled softly. There was no disappointment. Every skilled pair of hands had once been small and uncertain. The lesson would continue tomorrow. And the day after that. And many mornings beyond. Nearby, a rooster called into the growing light. Another answered from somewhere across the village. One by one, the sounds of waking life returned. A donkey shook its head, making the rope around its neck gently creak. A clay door opened with a soft scrape. Sandals brushed against packed earth. The village stretched awake almost without noticing. The sky slowly changed color. Deep blue faded into violet. Violet became pale gold. The first rays of sunlight touched the tops of the tallest palm trees before sliding gently across the rooftops. The coolness lingered for a little while longer. Everyone appreciated these early hours. They were the kindest part of the day. Farmers left their homes carrying simple wooden tools polished smooth by years of use. Some carried woven baskets. Others balanced water jars across their shoulders. One man gently adjusted the linen cloth around his head before stepping onto the dusty path leading toward the fields. His youngest son hurried to catch up. The boy insisted on carrying a small basket. It held only a few tools. His father could easily have carried everything himself. But allowing the child to help was part of the lesson. Responsibility arrived slowly. Like the sunrise itself. Together they walked through the quiet village. The air smelled of fresh bread, warm smoke, and damp earth. Neighbors greeted one another with calm voices. No one needed long conversations. They would spend much of the day working side by side. There would be plenty of time for quiet words beneath the shade of trees later. As they reached the fields, tiny drops of moisture still rested upon the leaves of young barley. The plants looked almost silver in the early light. Birds flew low across the canals searching for insects. The water reflected the brightening sky with perfect calm. The farmer paused for a moment. He looked across the land that had fed his family for generations. The soil was dark and rich. Every season, the Nile renewed it with fresh layers of fertile mud. That gift from the river made life possible. Without it, the fields would become dry sand. Every Egyptian understood this simple truth. It shaped their days more completely than almost anything else. The father stepped into the field. His son followed. Together they inspected the irrigation channels. One small section had become blocked by loose soil during the night. Without speaking, they cleared it. Water immediately began flowing again. The narrow stream quietly spread toward thirsty plants. The boy watched carefully. Small tasks mattered. Ignoring one blocked channel could slowly damage an entire field. These lessons could not be rushed. Nature rewarded patience. Farther along the riverbank, fishermen prepared their boats once again. Morning mist floated low across the calm surface of the Nile. The world looked softer through the thin white veil. Wooden boats emerged slowly from the mist as though they had always belonged there. One fisherman placed fresh bait into woven traps. Another carefully folded yesterday's repaired net. He smiled quietly as he noticed every knot remained strong. The work completed by lamplight had been worthwhile. His son untied the boat from its wooden post. Together they pushed gently away from the muddy shore. The water welcomed them with barely a sound. Their oars entered the river slowly. Each stroke sent gentle circles spreading across the still surface. Behind them, the village became smaller. Ahead of them stretched another peaceful morning upon the Nile. Along the shoreline, women filled clay jars with fresh water. They balanced the heavy vessels upon folded cloth resting on their heads. Years of practice allowed them to walk with remarkable grace. The water scarcely moved inside the jars despite every step. Young girls watched closely. One day they too would carry water this way. They would learn balance through repetition. Not from instructions alone. The rising sun slowly painted the desert hills with warm shades of gold. The valley awakened completely. Smoke rose from many homes. Children's voices mixed with birdsong. The smell of baking bread drifted across the fields once again. Another ordinary day had begun. It looked much like yesterday. It would likely resemble tomorrow. And for the people who lived beside the Nile, there was deep comfort in that gentle sameness. The river still flowed. The fields still grew. The ovens still warmed fresh bread. Families still greeted one another beneath the morning sky. In a world that changed slowly, peace was often found not in remarkable moments, but in faithful routines repeated with steady hands and quiet hearts, as another calm Egyptian morning unfolded beneath the endless desert sky. The morning settled gently over the valley, unfolding at its own unhurried pace. The first hours after sunrise were often the busiest, yet they never felt rushed. People had learned long ago that the day was long enough for steady hands. There was little reason to hurry when tomorrow would bring many of the same tasks, and the day after that would do the same. The Nile glimmered beneath the soft golden light. Its surface reflected the pale blue sky with only the smallest ripples where fish rose briefly before disappearing again. Along the edges of the river, tall reeds swayed together, their slender stems bending with each passing breeze. The air still held a trace of the night's coolness. It would not last much longer. Farmers knew this without looking toward the sun. They could feel it in the changing wind, in the warmth returning to the earth beneath their sandals, and in the quiet way the birds became more active before seeking shade later in the day. One farmer knelt beside a narrow irrigation channel. The water moved slowly between raised banks of dark soil. He watched it carefully. There was no need to force it forward. If the channel had been shaped well, the water would find its own gentle path through every corner of the field. He reached down with both hands and removed a small clump of reeds that had begun to collect near the opening. Immediately the current widened slightly. Tiny waves spread across the surface before settling once again. The farmer smiled to himself. Sometimes the smallest effort brought the greatest reward. Nearby, another family harvested bundles of flax. The tall green stems had grown steadily through many quiet weeks. Now they were ready to become linen. Each bundle was gathered carefully, tied with simple cords, and laid neatly in rows upon the ground. The work required patience more than strength. No one spoke very much. The sound of the stalks brushing together filled the silence. Their dry leaves whispered softly each time they were lifted. The oldest daughter worked beside her mother. She had learned to recognize the healthiest plants simply by their color and feel. Her hands moved with growing confidence. She no longer needed constant guidance. Every season had taught her a little more. Every morning beside the fields had quietly added another lesson. Not far away, several oxen pulled a wooden plow through another piece of fertile land. The animals moved slowly. Their broad shoulders carried the weight with calm determination. The farmer walked behind them with steady steps, guiding the plow through the rich black soil left behind by the Nile's floods. Fresh earth rolled gently aside. The smell of damp soil rose into the warming air. It was a rich, comforting scent that spoke of life and another harvest still many months away. Small white birds followed behind. They searched the newly turned earth for insects uncovered by the plow. The farmer hardly noticed them anymore. They had followed plows for as long as anyone could remember. Some things in Egypt never seemed to change. The changing light, the growing crops, the returning birds, and the faithful river all belonged together. As the sun climbed higher, the village workshop slowly filled with familiar activity. A potter placed a fresh lump of clay upon the center of his wheel. His foot pushed gently against the wooden pedal. The wheel began to turn. Slowly at first. Then smoothly. His wet hands rose around the spinning clay. Without sudden movement, the rough shape slowly became a graceful water jar. Its walls grew thinner. Its neck became longer. Its mouth widened just enough to pour easily. Watching the process felt almost peaceful. Nothing happened quickly. The clay seemed to understand that good things arrived one careful moment at a time. Rows of finished pots stood nearby, drying beneath the morning sun. Some would carry grain. Others would hold fresh water from the Nile. Some would store oil or dried beans. Many would remain in the same household for years before finally wearing thin from daily use. Across the street, a basket maker worked beneath the shade of a palm roof. Bundles of papyrus reeds rested beside him. Each strip had been soaked until it became soft and flexible. His fingers moved almost without thought. Over. Under. Around. Pull gently. Tighten. Again. The pattern repeated. Little by little, an empty space became a sturdy basket. His young grandson sat nearby trying to copy the same movements with shorter pieces of reed. The first attempt leaned to one side. The second one came apart completely. The old man chuckled quietly, not because the child had failed, but because every basket maker had once begun exactly the same way. He gently untangled the reeds and handed them back. "Try again," he whispered. The child smiled. There was plenty of time. In ancient Egypt, learning rarely needed to be hurried. Farther into the village, the marketplace slowly came alive. It was not loud. It was not crowded in the way great cities sometimes became. Instead, people arrived little by little throughout the morning. Farmers carried baskets filled with onions, beans, cucumbers, and fresh herbs. Fishermen displayed their morning catch upon woven mats. Potters carefully arranged their newest jars where the sunlight showed their smooth surfaces. A woman offered freshly baked bread still warm from the oven. The smell drifted through the square, drawing smiles from those passing nearby. Neighbors greeted one another warmly. Many had known each other since childhood. They asked about parents, children, and aging grandparents. One merchant paused to admire a finely woven basket. The basket maker examined a newly fired water jar. Sometimes trades happened without many words. Both people understood the value of careful work. A fair exchange left everyone satisfied. Not because either person had gained more, but because both could return home with what they needed. At the edge of the marketplace sat an elderly scribe beneath a simple canopy of woven reeds. His writing board rested comfortably upon his knees. People occasionally approached him with requests. One man needed a list of grain deliveries recorded. Another wanted a short message written for a relative in another settlement. The scribe listened patiently. He dipped his reed pen into black ink. Each symbol appeared with quiet precision. His handwriting had become steadier over many years. There was a calm beauty in lines written slowly. Even those who could not read often admired the graceful shapes flowing across the papyrus. The scribe worked without hurry. Ink dried naturally beneath the warm air. Nothing needed to be rushed. Meanwhile, children found their own quiet adventures. A small group gathered beneath a sycamore tree where the shade remained cool. They collected smooth pebbles from the riverbank and arranged them into little patterns upon the ground. Others practiced throwing tiny sticks toward circles drawn in the dust. Their games required little. A few stones. A patch of earth. A little imagination. Occasionally laughter rose into the air before quickly settling once more into peaceful conversation. Nearby, an older sister watched over her younger brothers. Every now and then she brushed dust from their hair or reminded them not to wander too close to the irrigation canals. Responsibility arrived early in Egyptian families. Yet it often came wrapped in quiet affection. As the morning continued, the warmth slowly deepened. The bright light reflected from pale stone walls until the entire village seemed to glow. Workers paused now and then to drink from clay jars kept in shaded corners. The water remained pleasantly cool. Some jars had been wrapped with damp cloth. As the moisture slowly evaporated, it carried away a little heat, making the water inside even more refreshing. A farmer lifted one jar carefully. He drank slowly rather than all at once. The cool water eased the dryness in his throat. For a few moments he simply stood beneath the shade of an acacia tree, listening to leaves rustle overhead. He watched a pair of birds building a nest among the branches. One bird arrived carrying a tiny piece of dry grass. The other carefully tucked it into place. Neither seemed hurried. The nest grew little by little. It reminded him of the way fields were planted. The way houses were built. The way families slowly grew across the years. Everything lasting seemed to require patience. Farther down the river, a group of young fishermen practiced casting small nets beneath the careful eyes of older relatives. The first throws landed unevenly. The ropes tangled. The nets folded awkwardly before touching the water. No one became frustrated. The older fishermen simply demonstrated again. The younger ones tried once more. Each attempt became a little smoother. The river itself seemed willing to teach anyone prepared to learn with quiet persistence. Above them, the sun continued its slow climb across the sky. Its warmth spread steadily over the valley. The shadows beneath the palm trees grew shorter. Soon the hottest part of the day would arrive. The pace of work would naturally slow. People would seek the comfort of shade. Conversations would become softer. The ovens would cool after the morning's bread had been baked. The fields would wait patiently until the afternoon breeze returned. But for now, the village remained gently alive. Every doorway stood open. Every workshop echoed with careful hands at work. Every path carried someone walking toward another ordinary task. And through it all, the Nile flowed quietly beside them, just as it had yesterday, just as it would tomorrow, carrying the calm heartbeat of ancient Egypt through another peaceful morning beneath the endless sky. As the morning slowly leaned toward midday, the sunlight became brighter with every passing moment. The gentle coolness that had greeted the first workers before dawn quietly faded into memory. Warmth settled across the fields, climbed the mud brick walls, and rested upon the flat rooftops where families had slept only a few hours before. No one seemed surprised. This was the familiar rhythm of every clear day. The people of Egypt did not measure time by clocks or bells. They measured it by the warmth upon their skin, by the length of shadows stretching across the ground, and by the changing colors of the Nile beneath the sun. A farmer standing at the edge of his barley field looked toward the river. The water had become brighter now, sparkling beneath countless points of sunlight. A light breeze crossed its surface, carrying with it the fresh scent of wet reeds and dark fertile soil. He took a slow breath. Then he returned to his work. His wooden hoe entered the earth with a quiet scrape. Lift. Pull. Smooth the soil. Step forward. Again. The movements had become so familiar that they required almost no thought. His body remembered the rhythm even when his mind wandered gently toward thoughts of his family, the coming harvest, or the evening meal waiting many hours ahead. Nearby, his wife gathered bundles of fresh herbs growing beside the irrigation channels. Green coriander. Fragrant dill. Tender leaves that would add gentle flavor to simple meals. She carried a woven basket over one arm, placing each handful inside with careful attention. Nothing was collected carelessly. Every plant had taken time to grow. Every leaf would become part of the family's supper. She paused beneath a date palm where the shade still offered a little relief. Above her, ripe clusters of dates hung quietly among broad leaves. The fruit would continue ripening beneath the summer sun before being carefully gathered. Some would be eaten fresh. Others would be dried and stored for months ahead. Children looked forward to those sweet dates with quiet excitement. Their taste brought comfort after long days filled with ordinary work. A little farther away, an elderly grandfather watched two young grandchildren chasing dragonflies along the edge of a shallow canal. The insects darted through the warm air like tiny pieces of blue glass. The children laughed softly each time one escaped their reaching hands. The old man smiled. He remembered doing exactly the same thing when he had been their age. The canal had looked much the same then. The dragonflies had danced above the same water. Even the breeze seemed familiar. Some memories never truly disappeared. They simply rested quietly beneath the years until an ordinary afternoon invited them back again. Across the village, the marketplace had become comfortably busy. Not crowded. Not noisy. Simply full of steady movement. A merchant carefully unfolded a length of finely woven linen. The cloth caught the sunlight, revealing delicate threads spun through many weeks of patient work. A woman ran her fingers gently across the fabric. She admired its smoothness. They discussed its value with calm voices. Neither wished to rush the exchange. Good linen deserved thoughtful consideration. Nearby, another merchant displayed small clay jars filled with fragrant oils. The scents drifted gently through the warm air. Lotus, sweet herbs, fresh resin collected from distant trees. People paused for a moment to breathe in the pleasant aromas before continuing on their way. A basket filled with onions rested beside another containing garlic. Fresh cucumbers lay neatly arranged beside bundles of leafy greens. Simple foods. Familiar foods. The kinds of meals that had filled Egyptian homes for countless generations. An elderly woman selected several onions before thanking the farmer who had grown them. They had known each other for many years. Their conversation wandered gently from vegetables to grandchildren, from weather to river levels. There was no hurry to finish speaking. The afternoon still waited ahead. Beyond the marketplace, the sound of steady tapping echoed from a stone workshop. A mason worked patiently upon a limestone block. His copper chisel removed only tiny pieces with each careful strike. Dust gathered around his sandals. Sunlight entered through the wide doorway, filling the room with a soft golden glow. His apprentice stood nearby, brushing loose stone powder from the finished surfaces. Every now and then the older craftsman paused. He examined the smoothness of the stone with both hands rather than only his eyes. Rough places could often be felt before they could be seen. The apprentice watched carefully. He understood that these quiet pauses were just as important as the carving itself. Skill often lived inside patience, not speed. The smell of fresh bread still lingered through many parts of the village, though the morning baking had long since ended. Clay ovens slowly cooled. Ash settled quietly inside their rounded chambers. A baker swept the floor with a bundle of dry reeds before preparing grain for tomorrow. There was always another loaf to bake. Another family to feed. Another morning waiting beyond tonight's sleep. The work never truly ended. Yet it rarely felt endless. Each day completed its own gentle circle. As the sun climbed even higher, shadows became short and narrow. Palm trees cast little islands of welcome shade upon the dusty ground. Travelers walking between villages naturally slowed their pace. Many stopped beneath trees to rest before continuing. One merchant leading 2 donkeys loaded with woven baskets removed his sandals for a few moments. He sat beneath an acacia tree. The earth felt pleasantly cool in the shade. His donkeys quietly chewed dried grasses nearby. He drank slowly from a clay water jar wrapped in damp linen. A few drops rolled down the outside of the vessel before disappearing into the thirsty ground. He closed his eyes for a moment. The breeze touched his face. Birds called softly from somewhere high among the branches. No one disturbed him. Everyone understood the value of resting during the hottest part of the day. Along the Nile, fishermen returned with their morning catch. Their boats glided toward the shore almost silently. Wood scraped gently against the muddy bank. One by one they lifted woven baskets filled with fish shimmering in the sunlight. The silver scales reflected flashes of light before being covered with damp reeds to keep them cool. Children waited nearby. They always seemed curious about the morning's catch. One little girl pointed toward a particularly large fish. Her father smiled. He gently lifted it for her to see more closely. Its smooth scales glistened like polished metal. Its tail moved once before becoming still. The girl listened as her father quietly explained where it had been caught, how the nets had been placed before sunrise, and why patience often mattered more than strength when fishing the Nile. She listened carefully. Not because she planned to become a fisherman, but because every story about the river became another piece of family memory. In another corner of the village, a group of women gathered beneath the wide branches of a sycamore tree. They spun flax fibers into thread. Each spindle turned slowly between practiced fingers. Twist. Stretch. Turn. Again. The rhythm became almost musical. Conversation rose and faded between the steady movements. One woman spoke about repairing a roof before the next flood season. Another wondered whether her oldest son might soon begin an apprenticeship with a carpenter. An older grandmother quietly shared a memory of learning the same spinning work from her own mother many decades earlier. The younger women smiled. They had heard the story before. Yet they listened once again. Some stories grew more comforting every time they were told. Nearby, several toddlers had fallen asleep beneath the shade. Their mothers continued spinning while occasionally glancing toward them. Tiny chests rose and fell with peaceful breathing. The warmth of the afternoon encouraged sleep. Even the village dogs stretched lazily beneath shaded walls. Cats rested upon warm rooftops with half-closed eyes. Life itself seemed to slow. Not because work had ended, but because the sun gently asked everyone to move with greater care. Far across the fertile fields, a pair of oxen stood quietly beside a small canal. They drank deeply from the cool water before lifting their heads. Drops fell slowly from their broad mouths back into the canal. A farmer gently stroked one animal's neck. These faithful creatures worked beside him every season. He knew their habits well. He recognized each scar upon their hides. They were companions in labor as much as they were working animals. When they rested, he rested. When they walked, he walked. Together they followed the same fields year after year. The afternoon breeze strengthened ever so slightly. Palm leaves whispered overhead. The sound drifted across the village like a gentle song that everyone had known since birth. Children grew quieter. Workers sought shade a little more often. Clay walls shimmered beneath the bright light. Beyond the fertile valley, the desert stretched peacefully toward the distant horizon, its golden sands glowing beneath the unwavering sun. Yet within the green ribbon of life beside the Nile, everything continued with calm purpose. Fields received water. Bread nourished families. Nets were repaired. Cloth was woven. Stories were shared. Children learned by watching patient hands. And beneath the vast Egyptian sky, another quiet afternoon unfolded exactly as so many had before, carrying ordinary people gently through another peaceful day in the timeless rhythm of the ancient world. By the middle of the afternoon, the valley seemed to breathe more slowly. The bright light remained strong, yet the hardest heat had begun to soften, almost too gently to notice. A faint breeze traveled north along the Nile, stirring the tops of the papyrus reeds before wandering through the narrow streets of the village. It carried the scent of river water, of warm earth, of baked clay, of straw drying beneath the sun. These familiar scents belonged to every season of life. A woman stood in the doorway of her home, looking toward the fields where her family worked. She held a woven fan made from palm leaves. With slow, steady movements she stirred the warm air around a sleeping infant resting in a small cradle woven from reeds. The baby slept peacefully. Tiny fingers remained gently curled. Every now and then the child sighed softly before settling even deeper into sleep. The mother smiled without making a sound. She knew there would soon be another feeding, another blanket to adjust, another quiet lullaby whispered into the warm afternoon. For now, she simply watched her child dream while sunlight rested across the courtyard. Nearby, a clay water jar stood in the shade. Its outer surface remained damp. Small beads of moisture slowly cooled the water inside. A young boy carefully dipped a simple cup into the jar. He carried it across the courtyard to his grandmother. She accepted it with grateful hands. The cool water refreshed her after another morning spent weaving linen. She drank slowly. There was no reason to hurry even with something as simple as a cup of water. Small moments deserved to be enjoyed. Across the village, a linen weaver continued her work beneath an open shelter. Long threads stretched tightly across a wooden loom. She passed the shuttle through them with calm precision. Back and forth. Back and forth. Each movement added another narrow line to the growing cloth. The sound was soft. Wood touching wood. Thread sliding gently into place. The rhythm became almost like breathing. Her daughter sat nearby untangling small bundles of flax fibers. She occasionally looked up to watch the cloth slowly grow. It seemed almost magical that hundreds of tiny threads could become one smooth piece of fabric. Yet her mother knew there was no magic. Only patience. Patience turned plants into thread. Thread into cloth. Cloth into clothing. And clothing into something that protected families from the bright Egyptian sun. Nothing lasting arrived all at once. At the edge of the settlement, a carpenter rested his tools upon a wooden bench. He stepped outside into the shade and stretched his back. The smell of fresh-cut acacia wood still clung to his hands. Fine sawdust covered his sandals. He looked toward the river for a few quiet moments. The afternoon light shimmered across the water. A pair of white birds crossed the sky before disappearing toward distant marshes. He listened. The distant tapping of another craftsman. The low voices of neighbors. The gentle creak of a cartwheel somewhere along the road. These sounds formed the music of ordinary life. They had become so familiar that he often noticed them only when he paused to rest. A little farther away, two elderly neighbors sat beneath the broad shade of a sycamore tree. Neither was strong enough for long hours in the fields anymore. Instead, they repaired simple household items. One carefully rewove the handle of an old basket. The other mended a fishing net that had served his family for many seasons. Their hands moved slowly, but they still moved with confidence. Years had taken away speed. They had not taken away skill. As they worked, they spoke quietly about seasons long past. They remembered floods that had reached unusually high upon the riverbank. They remembered years when the barley had grown especially thick. They remembered friends who had laughed beneath this very tree many summers before. The memories carried no sadness. Only gratitude. The years had passed gently, like water flowing around smooth stones. Near the village well, several donkeys waited patiently beneath a shelter woven from palm branches. Heavy baskets rested beside them. Soon they would carry grain to nearby storehouses. For now they stood quietly, flicking their tails now and then to chase away flies. A young stable boy brushed one donkey's coat with a bundle of dry reeds. The animal lowered its head contentedly. The boy hummed softly to himself. He had no audience. No reason to perform. The simple tune helped pass the afternoon while his hands continued their gentle work. Across the open fields, a family harvested vegetables ready for gathering. Bright green lettuce. Round onions. Fresh beans. Each plant was lifted carefully from the rich soil. The youngest children carried only small baskets. Even these felt heavy after a little while. Whenever one child grew tired, an older brother quietly exchanged baskets without making much of it. Helping one another required no special occasion. It was simply part of daily life. The rows slowly became empty. The baskets slowly became full. The work continued beneath the patient sun. Along one irrigation canal, water moved with its usual quiet purpose. Tiny ripples caught the afternoon light before disappearing beneath overhanging reeds. A turtle rested upon a smooth stone near the bank. It hardly moved. Only its eyes followed the passing dragonflies. Nearby, frogs slipped silently into the water whenever footsteps approached. Life beside the canals unfolded gently. Every small creature seemed to know its place within the rhythm of the valley. A fisherman returning from the river stopped beside the canal to wash his hands. Cool water flowed over weathered fingers marked by years of pulling ropes and repairing nets. He watched the current for a moment. It carried away tiny grains of sand. Small leaves floated past. Nothing struggled against the river. Everything moved with it. He found that comforting. Back in the village, the smell of drying linen drifted through several courtyards. Freshly washed cloth hung from simple wooden poles. The breeze lifted the edges gently. The fabric glowed softly in the afternoon sunlight. An elderly woman walked between the hanging cloths, checking each piece. If one corner folded unevenly, she straightened it. If another slipped too low, she tied it again. Care shown to small things often lasted for years. Nothing was beneath her attention. A little distance away, a potter carefully opened the clay kiln where yesterday's work had finished firing. Warm air escaped into the courtyard. One by one he lifted each finished vessel. A broad storage jar. Several small bowls. A slender pitcher. He tapped each gently with a fingertip. The clear sound told him whether the clay had baked evenly. Most had. One bowl carried a tiny crack near its base. He set it aside without disappointment. Not every piece emerged perfect. The clay taught patience just as surely as the fields did. Tomorrow another lump of river clay would rest upon the wheel. Another bowl would slowly take shape beneath careful hands. As the afternoon gradually drifted toward evening, shadows began stretching across the dusty paths once more. Palm trees painted long patterns across the ground. The brightest heat slowly loosened its hold upon the valley. Workers noticed the change almost without speaking. Movements became a little easier. Breathing became a little lighter. Birdsong slowly returned after the long quiet hours of midday. Children who had rested indoors wandered outside again. Some collected smooth shells along the riverbank. Others followed older siblings carrying empty baskets back toward the fields. A little girl stopped to watch a line of ants crossing the path. Each carried a tiny piece of leaf many times its own size. She knelt quietly, fascinated by their steady determination. After a while she stood and continued walking. She never realized that the slow patience of those tiny creatures reflected the same gentle rhythm that shaped every corner of Egyptian life. Above the valley, the sunlight gradually turned from brilliant white to warm gold. The desert hills beyond the fertile fields glowed softly beneath the lowering sun. Their colors deepened with every passing moment. The river reflected those golden tones until it seemed to carry liquid light through the heart of the land. The village continued its quiet work. Tools rose and fell. Voices remained gentle. Cooking fires would soon be lit once more. Fresh bread would again fill the evening air with its comforting aroma. Families would gather beneath the cooling sky. And another ordinary day, filled with patient labor, simple kindness, and familiar routines, would slowly begin its peaceful journey toward night beside the timeless waters of the Nile. The golden light of late afternoon rested gently across the valley. The sun had begun its slow descent toward the western horizon, and everything it touched seemed softer than it had only an hour before. The harsh brightness of midday had faded into a warm glow that settled over the mud brick homes, the green fields, and the quiet river. Long shadows stretched across the dusty paths. Palm trees painted graceful patterns upon the earth. Even the smallest stones seemed wrapped in gentle light. For many people, this was the most pleasant part of the working day. The air had become easier to breathe. The breeze carried a welcome coolness from the Nile. Voices drifted farther now that the heat no longer pressed heavily upon the land. Along one field, a group of farmers finished tying bundles of barley. The stalks were gathered carefully with braided strips of flax. Each bundle was lifted upright so that the grain heads remained dry and clean. The work had continued since morning. Now only a few rows remained. No one hurried to finish before sunset. The fields had waited patiently through the changing seasons. They could wait a little longer. An older farmer straightened his back and looked across the valley. The sunlight shimmered over the canals, turning every narrow stream into a ribbon of gold. He rested both hands upon the smooth handle of his wooden tool. His shoulders were tired. His hands were rough. Yet there was quiet satisfaction in seeing another day's work almost complete. He knew tomorrow would bring more. That thought did not trouble him. Tomorrow had always arrived. Nearby, his granddaughter gathered loose stalks that had fallen between the rows. She carried them one handful at a time to the growing pile. The bundles were almost as tall as she was. Every few moments she stopped to brush loose strands of hair away from her face. The breeze played gently with the edges of her linen dress. She smiled to herself as she worked. Helping the family felt natural. No one had asked her to move quickly. She simply matched the calm pace of those around her. Farther down the field, 2 oxen stood quietly beneath a cluster of trees. Their work was finished for the day. They lowered their heads toward fresh bundles of grass prepared for them earlier. The animals chewed slowly, occasionally lifting their ears when birds fluttered through the branches overhead. Their breathing was deep and steady. A young boy brought each of them a bucket of fresh water. He gently rubbed one broad forehead before stepping away again. The ox blinked slowly, calm and trusting. Many seasons of working together had created a quiet understanding between animal and farmer. Along the riverbank, fishermen prepared for the evening. Some had already returned from the day's work. Others chose to remain on the water a little longer, knowing that different fish became active as the sunlight softened. Small boats drifted lazily upon the calm current. Wooden oars entered the water with hardly a splash. The river reflected the changing colors of the sky. Blue slowly blended into gold. Gold slowly deepened toward orange. Each passing moment painted the Nile with another gentle shade. One elderly fisherman untangled a small section of net while sitting quietly in his boat. His fingers moved almost without thought. The repair required only a few careful knots. He had tied thousands of them throughout his life. His father had once shown him exactly how to make each knot strong enough to endure many days upon the river. Now his own grandson watched from the front of the boat. The boy said very little. He simply observed. Learning often happened this way. Patient eyes. Quiet hands. Time. The old fisherman finished the repair and placed the net neatly beside him. The boy smiled. One day those same movements would belong to him. In the village, the marketplace slowly began to empty. The busiest hours had passed. Merchants folded woven cloths. Potters carefully packed away the bowls and jars that had not been traded. Farmers lifted lighter baskets now that most of their vegetables had found new homes. Conversations continued as people prepared to leave. No one seemed eager to rush away. Neighbors lingered beneath shaded awnings. They spoke about tomorrow's work. About children growing taller. About repairs that still needed to be made before the next flood season. The conversations wandered gently from one thought to another, just as the river wandered through the valley. A woman carrying a basket of fresh herbs paused beside another merchant selling woven sandals. She admired the careful stitching along the straps. The sandal maker explained which leather had been used and how long it had taken to finish the pair. She nodded thoughtfully. Good craftsmanship deserved careful attention. Whether she purchased them today or another day mattered very little. The sandals would still be there tomorrow if they were meant for her. Nearby, an elderly potter carefully swept fine dust from the floor of his workshop. The day's work had ended. Rows of drying vessels rested upon wooden shelves. Some would remain there another day before entering the kiln. Others had already become strong enough to hold water, grain, or oil. He paused beside one newly shaped jar. Its smooth surface caught the warm evening light. He gently placed one hand upon it. The clay still felt cool. Tomorrow it would be a little firmer. Soon it would become part of someone's home. Perhaps it would stand beside a family oven. Perhaps it would carry fresh water from the Nile every morning. Perhaps a child not yet born would one day drink from it. The thought pleased him. His work would quietly become part of another family's ordinary life. Children wandered through the village gathering kindling for the evening fires. Dry reeds. Small branches. Bundles of straw. Each child carried only what they comfortably could. Older brothers and sisters helped the younger ones lift heavier bundles. The paths echoed with gentle footsteps. Occasionally laughter floated through the air before fading once again into peaceful conversation. Near one courtyard, several women prepared the evening meal together. One washed vegetables. Another shaped fresh dough into round loaves. A third stirred lentils inside a clay pot suspended above glowing coals. The smell of onions slowly cooking filled the air. Soon garlic joined it. Then fresh herbs. The comforting aromas drifted through nearby streets. Families returning from the fields recognized those familiar scents long before reaching home. The smell itself felt like welcome. A little girl carefully carried a bowl of dates from the storage room. She counted them quietly as she arranged them upon a woven tray. Her grandmother watched with a warm smile. The child concentrated deeply, determined not to drop even one. When she finished, the older woman gently adjusted the arrangement only slightly. "Beautiful," she whispered. The girl smiled with quiet pride. Simple praise remained in her heart far longer than grand rewards ever could. Across another courtyard, a father repaired a wooden stool that had become loose after years of use. He fitted a fresh peg into one corner before testing its strength. His oldest son watched closely. The boy handed him tools whenever asked. Hammer. Wooden peg. Small knife. Piece of cord. Each object returned to its place after use. Good order made every task a little easier. The father explained very little. Instead, the boy learned by watching each careful movement. As the sky slowly changed from gold to soft amber, birds began returning to the trees lining the riverbank. Their evening songs floated across the fields. Goats wandered home through familiar paths without needing guidance. Donkeys carried empty baskets that had been heavy only hours before. The entire village seemed to move gently toward rest. The day's labor slowly gave way to evening routines. Water jars were filled one final time. Courtyards were swept. Cooking fires glowed brighter. Fresh bread emerged from warm ovens. Families gathered one by one beneath the fading light. The breeze became cooler now. Palm leaves whispered overhead. The first evening star quietly appeared above the western desert. Few people looked up immediately. There was still bread to serve. Children to wash. Tools to store. Animals to feed. These ordinary tasks deserved their full attention. The stars would still be waiting when the work was done. And so another peaceful Egyptian evening unfolded with quiet certainty, not through grand events or remarkable moments, but through hundreds of small acts of care repeated by gentle hands, as the timeless rhythm of the Nile carried another calm day softly toward the embrace of night. As the last warmth of the afternoon slowly slipped into evening, the village seemed to exhale. The day's work had not disappeared all at once. It simply became quieter. The steady rhythm of labor gave way to the equally familiar rhythm of returning home. Dust settled along the narrow paths as sandals carried fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters back through the small streets they had walked since childhood. The western sky glowed with deep shades of gold. Far beyond the fertile valley, the desert hills caught the final sunlight. Their rocky slopes seemed almost to shine for a few peaceful moments before the light slowly softened into gentle browns and cool shadows. The Nile reflected every change. Its calm surface held the colors of the evening as though carefully protecting them. A fisherman guided his small wooden boat toward the familiar landing place where his family waited. The river carried him quietly. There was no need for hurried rowing now. The current itself seemed willing to help him reach home. As the boat touched the muddy bank, his oldest son stepped forward to steady it. Together they lifted the woven baskets filled with fish. The catch was modest. Enough for their own household. Enough to trade a little the following morning. That was all they had hoped for. Contentment often arrived in simple forms. A basket filled just enough. A roof that kept out the rain. A healthy family gathered around the evening meal. For many people living beside the Nile, these quiet blessings were more valuable than anything made of gold. Nearby, another family crossed a small footbridge built over one of the irrigation canals. The children stopped halfway across. The water below reflected the orange sky so perfectly that it seemed another sunset lay beneath their feet. Tiny fish disturbed the reflection from time to time, sending circles gently spreading across the surface. The youngest child leaned carefully over the edge. His older sister held the back of his linen tunic to keep him safe. Neither spoke. They simply watched the water together until their mother called softly for them to continue home. Inside the village, cooking fires burned steadily. The smoke rose slowly into the cooling air. The scent of fresh bread mixed with roasting fish, warm lentils, onions, garlic, and fragrant herbs gathered that morning beside the canals. These familiar smells drifted through every street. Each family recognized the comforting aroma of home long before reaching its doorway. One grandmother knelt beside a clay oven. Using a wooden paddle worn smooth by many years of use, she carefully removed round loaves whose crusts had turned a rich golden brown. The bread crackled softly as cooler evening air touched its warm surface. She smiled. Every loaf looked slightly different. Some rose a little higher. Some baked a little darker. Yet every one carried the careful work of patient hands. Her granddaughter stood beside her holding a woven basket lined with clean linen. One by one, the loaves were placed inside. The child breathed deeply. The smell of fresh bread filled the little courtyard. It was a smell she had known since her earliest memories. Perhaps one day, many years from now, she would remember this very evening while baking bread for children of her own. Across the narrow lane, an elderly man sat quietly upon a low wooden stool outside his home. He had finished eating. His walking staff rested beside him. The evening breeze gently stirred the loose edges of his linen clothing. He watched neighbors return from the fields. Young children skipped happily ahead of their parents. Older boys carried tools across their shoulders. Women balanced baskets of vegetables with practiced grace. The old man smiled at each familiar face. He had watched many of these people grow from infancy into adulthood. The village changed slowly. New children were born. Older generations quietly departed. Yet the gentle rhythm remained. One season followed another. Life continued. Near the center of the village, several young apprentices finished cleaning their workshops before nightfall. The carpenter carefully hung each tool upon its wooden peg. The potter covered fresh clay to keep it moist until morning. The basket maker stacked unfinished reeds beneath a woven cloth so they would not dry too quickly. Every tool had its place. Every task had its proper ending. Leaving a workshop in good order meant tomorrow could begin peacefully. There was comfort in preparing today for the needs of tomorrow. As twilight deepened, more families climbed onto the flat roofs of their homes. The stone and mud brick still held gentle warmth gathered during the day. Children carried rolled sleeping mats. Parents spread light linen blankets across them. The evening air became pleasantly cool. Above, the sky slowly welcomed its first bright stars. A little boy pointed upward. "Look," he whispered. His grandfather followed his finger toward a familiar group of stars shining above the eastern horizon. For many years those stars had greeted him each evening. As a young farmer he had often looked toward them while returning home after long days in the fields. As a father he had shown them to his own children. Now he shared them with another generation. The stars seemed unchanged. Patient. Steady. Faithful. Their quiet presence comforted everyone beneath them. Farther along the riverbank, a group of women finished washing the final pottery bowls from supper. The cool water reflected the rising moon. Each bowl was rinsed carefully before being placed upside down upon woven mats to dry overnight. Nearby, several clay jars were filled once again with fresh water. Tomorrow morning they would already be waiting before the first family member awoke. Preparing for tomorrow always began tonight. No effort felt wasted. Inside one modest home, a young mother gently combed her daughter's hair using a finely carved wooden comb. The little girl leaned sleepily against her shoulder. The long day had filled her with pleasant exhaustion. Her small hands still carried faint traces of flour from helping shape bread earlier that afternoon. Her sandals rested neatly beside the doorway. Tomorrow they would carry her once again through familiar paths between home, fields, and river. For now, they waited quietly beside the wall. Outside, frogs had begun their evening songs along the canals. Crickets answered from the grasses. The reeds whispered together whenever the breeze wandered through them. The sounds blended into a peaceful chorus that belonged only to the hours after sunset. No musician directed them. The land itself seemed to sing. A fisherman sat alone for a little while at the edge of the Nile before returning home. He dipped one hand into the cool water. Small ripples spread outward beneath the moonlight. The river felt different at night. During the day it served fields, boats, and busy workers. Now it seemed to rest alongside the people who depended upon it. Its current never stopped. Yet somehow it felt quieter beneath the stars. He listened to the water brushing gently against the reeds. He could smell damp earth cooling after the long day. A nightbird flew low across the surface before disappearing into the darkness downstream. He remained there for several peaceful moments. There was nothing he needed to fix. Nothing he needed to carry. Nothing he needed to decide. The day had already offered everything it was meant to offer. Tomorrow would arrive in its own time. As darkness gently settled across the valley, lamps glowed softly behind doorways throughout the village. Golden light spilled onto the dusty streets before slowly fading into the night. Families spoke in quieter voices now. Some children had already fallen asleep. Others listened drowsily as grandparents shared gentle stories about the river, the fields, and seasons remembered from long ago. One by one, the lamps would be extinguished. One by one, conversations would fade into silence. Only the Nile would continue its endless journey beneath the stars, carrying cool water through the heart of Egypt just as it had for countless generations, while the peaceful village surrendered itself to another calm and comforting ancient night. The village grew quieter with each passing moment. One lamp after another was gently covered, leaving only a few warm points of light glowing behind open doorways. The narrow paths between the homes slowly disappeared into soft shadows. The dust that had risen beneath countless sandals during the day settled peacefully back upon the earth. Night had fully arrived. Above the Nile Valley, the sky stretched farther than anyone could imagine. Thousands of stars filled the darkness. Some appeared bright and steady. Others shimmered softly, their light gently trembling in the cool evening air. For the people of ancient Egypt, this sky was as familiar as the river itself. They had looked upon these same stars since childhood. Their parents had done the same. Their grandparents had done the same before them. Every clear night seemed to remind them that while individual lives were short, the quiet rhythm of the world continued without interruption. On one rooftop, a family prepared for sleep. The youngest child was already asleep upon a woven reed mat, one small arm resting above his head. His breathing was slow and even. His older sister lay beside him, still awake. She watched the stars for a little while. Every now and then she imagined shapes among the bright points of light, though she soon grew too sleepy to continue. Her mother gently adjusted the corner of a linen blanket around both children. The breeze had become cooler. It carried the fresh scent of the Nile mixed with the faint fragrance of drying reeds and warm mud brick. The mother remained seated for a few moments. She listened. Somewhere nearby, another family spoke in quiet voices before settling down for the night. A donkey shifted gently inside its shelter. Palm leaves brushed together overhead. Nothing more. Silence slowly became the strongest sound. Not far away, an elderly potter remained awake beside his workshop. The day had ended long ago, yet he enjoyed sitting outside beneath the stars before sleeping. His hands rested comfortably upon his knees. They still carried traces of fine clay beneath the fingernails despite careful washing. He looked toward the kiln standing quietly beside the workshop. Inside, vessels shaped several days earlier were slowly cooling. He would not open it until morning. There was no reason to hurry. Clay demanded patience from beginning to end. Too much heat could break it. Too little heat could weaken it. Opening the kiln too early could damage everything inside. Years of experience had taught him that waiting often accomplished more than rushing. The stars continued their slow journey overhead. The potter smiled softly before finally rising to go inside. Tomorrow would arrive soon enough. Along the riverbank, the moon climbed higher into the night sky. Its pale light rested gently upon the surface of the Nile. The current carried long ribbons of silver that shimmered quietly between the reeds. A pair of fishermen slept beside their small boat. They would leave before sunrise. Sleeping near the river saved time in the morning. One man's hand still rested lightly upon a neatly folded fishing net. He had repaired every broken knot before sunset. Now the net waited beside him, ready for another day. The river waited too. Patient. Unchanging. Steady. The reeds along the shore bent gently whenever the breeze passed through them. Tiny insects moved among their tall stems. Somewhere in the darkness, a frog called once before everything became still again. Farther inland, the fields rested beneath the moonlight. Only hours earlier they had been filled with quiet work. Farmers had walked between the rows. Children had carried baskets. Oxen had pulled wooden plows through rich black soil. Now every field lay silent. The young barley moved gently in the wind. The irrigation canals reflected narrow strips of moonlight. Water continued flowing through them with calm determination. Even while people slept, the land remained alive. Moisture soaked slowly into thirsty soil. Roots continued their silent work beneath the surface. Seeds rested patiently beneath the earth, preparing for another day of growth. Nature itself never seemed hurried. Inside one modest home, a grandmother awoke briefly during the night. She listened to the gentle breathing of her family. Her daughter slept nearby with the baby resting beside her. Two grandchildren lay curled together beneath a shared blanket. The room smelled faintly of fresh bread, warm clay, and dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams. The grandmother smiled quietly. Everything felt safe. Everything felt familiar. She closed her eyes once more. Sleep returned almost immediately. Across the village, a shepherd quietly checked his small flock one last time. The sheep rested together in a simple enclosure built from mud brick and woven branches. One young lamb stirred as the shepherd approached. He gently scratched behind its ears before stepping away again. He closed the wooden gate carefully. The sound was little more than a soft click. His work was finished. He walked home beneath the moonlight with slow, steady steps. The dusty path seemed almost white beneath the silver glow. He had walked this same road thousands of times. He knew every bend, every tree, every stone. Even in darkness, his feet found their way without hesitation. The village was not large. It did not need to be. Every family knew the others. Every doorway was familiar. Every courtyard held memories stretching back through many seasons. Near the center of the settlement stood a large sycamore tree. During the day its wide branches sheltered workers from the sun. Children played beneath it. Neighbors gathered there to share quiet conversations. Now it stood alone beneath the stars. Its leaves rustled softly whenever the wind passed through them. An owl landed upon one of the highest branches. It remained perfectly still for several minutes, watching the quiet village below. Then, almost silently, it spread its wings and disappeared into the darkness beyond the fields. The hours after midnight passed gently. There was no sense of urgency. Time itself seemed slower beneath the moon. The Nile continued flowing northward. The stars slowly crossed the sky. The breeze carried cool air across the rooftops where families slept peacefully. The warmth stored inside the mud brick walls gradually faded into the night. On one rooftop, a father shifted slightly in his sleep. His dreams were simple. He dreamed of healthy fields, of water flowing through clean canals, of children laughing while carrying baskets too large for their small arms. Even in dreams, life followed familiar paths. Nothing dramatic disturbed the quiet rhythm of his mind. The moon slowly began its journey toward the western sky. Its light changed almost too gradually to notice. The deepest darkness of the night had passed. Far away, beyond the eastern desert, the first faint promise of another morning waited below the horizon. No color had appeared yet. Only the smallest suggestion that night would not last forever. A few birds stirred within the palm trees. Not awake. Not fully asleep. Simply aware that another day was slowly making its way toward the valley. The people of ancient Egypt did not count these quiet hours as empty time. Rest was part of the rhythm, just as important as labor. Without peaceful nights, there could be no steady mornings. Without stillness, there could be no patient work. The calm of the darkness prepared every family for the gentle demands of another sunrise. And so the ancient village remained wrapped in silence, watched over by the stars, comforted by the whispering Nile, while the world waited peacefully for the first soft light of dawn to return once again. The first light of dawn had not yet reached the eastern horizon. For one final quiet moment, the ancient world rested exactly as it had through countless peaceful nights. The Nile continued its endless journey, carrying cool water through the sleeping valley without asking for praise or remembrance. The reeds along its banks whispered softly to one another. The palm trees stood patiently beneath the fading stars. Mud brick homes held families wrapped in gentle sleep, their breathing slow and calm beneath simple linen blankets. Soon another day would begin. Bread would once again rise in warm clay ovens. Farmers would walk familiar paths toward waiting fields. Fishermen would untie their boats from weathered wooden posts. Children would awaken to the comforting sounds of ordinary life, slowly learning the same careful routines that had shaped generations before them. Nothing about the morning would seem remarkable. And perhaps that was the quiet secret of ancient Egypt. Its greatest strength was not found only in towering stone monuments or the names of kings remembered across the centuries. It lived just as deeply in ordinary mornings. In patient hands that planted seeds. In families who shared simple meals. In neighbors who greeted one another with gentle voices. In craftsmen who shaped clay, carved wood, wove linen, and repaired the same trusted tools year after year. Their names have mostly faded into silence. Their footsteps have long since disappeared from the dusty paths beside the Nile. Their homes have returned to the earth from which they were built. Yet the peaceful rhythm of their lives still echoes across history. If we listen quietly enough, we can almost hear it. The soft scrape of sandals across packed soil. The steady turning of a potter's wheel. The gentle splash of an oar entering calm river water. The warm crackle of fresh bread leaving a clay oven. The whisper of evening wind moving through fields of barley. These were the sounds that filled most days. Not battles. Not celebrations. Just the quiet music of people living ordinary lives with patience, care, and hope. As the stars slowly fade above the Nile, the village remains wrapped in peaceful stillness. The river flows on. The breeze drifts gently through the reeds. The first birds prepare their morning songs somewhere beyond the darkness. And little by little, the ancient world dissolves into the calm silence of memory. May the quiet fields beside the Nile remain with you. May the warm desert breeze feel gentle upon your thoughts. May the soft glow of distant lamps, the comforting scent of fresh bread, and the endless rhythm of the river carry you peacefully into rest. Now the village grows silent once more. The river keeps its patient course beneath the brightening sky. The stars quietly surrender to the coming dawn. And history, like the gentle waters of the Nile, drifts softly away into stillness, until all that remains is peace.